The success of the last video, which gave the crazy units talents, was completely insane, so it's clear that you all must want more of it, or it was a fluke. As I said in my previous video, the topic of this one is technically one I already did a year ago. Though again, as I always say, don't watch the original. I was sick when I made it and I was doing a stupid accent for a channel gimmick at the time. While a lot of you said the talents I gave the crazy units were broken or insane since it's difficult to give such a generally great group of cats talents, I think it'd be more easy and simply more sensible to give the seasonal rares talents instead, due to the fact that for the most part, they're rather underwhelming no matter where you happen to get them in the game. Just like the previous video, I'll be sticking to giving these cats talents that already exist, and for a few of these cats, they'll need more than a 20% buff despite that not being universal. On top of this, if a cat gains a new ability, just like my Crazed Cats video, and they don't already target a trait, then assume that ability is effective against everyone except metals. Before I start the video as usual, here's a verse from the Bible. Matthew 5:16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Rampage. Easily one of the strangest units in the entire game, as he's supposed to function as a ranged meat shield, though his main issue is the fact that he has horrendous HP and a 375C cost. He's basically Team Master Cat without any niches or immunities. And Team Master is already a rather niche unit with those very immunities. But here's what I had in mind. Talents: defense buff 20%, 125 NP. Immune to surge 75 NP. Immune to waves 75 NP. Freeze immunity 75 NP. Curse resist 6%, 60% max, 125 NP. Total 475 NP. Rampage's talents are extremely simple, and though you may have expected him to have an 80% buff to his HP, at level 50 he actually has 22.6k HP. This is nearing Eraser Cat levels of HP, and I'd say that despite it being low and him costing 375C, it's still balanced thanks to his 4 knockbacks, immunities, and range of 330. His range completely defines his role, as he's made to be a second or third layer meat shield. So his survivability is extremely important, as he exists to make enemies progress just slightly slower after your first line of meat shields. It would have been better if his range was maybe 250 or just 300, but 330 is still enough to save your backlining cats like Dragon or Ubers like Devil Hunter Satoru. Instead of making him something that he's not, I gave him mostly immunity so that he could persevere in the face of different attacks created to disturb your backline. Waves and surges are obvious as they pierce into your backline, and especially surges hurt your backline in a specific location a lot of the time. So this is a perfect talent for someone like Rampage. Freeze immunity is pretty niche, but it can be used to counter Henry or other enemies that can freeze the backline easily. And curse resist is obvious for in case he gets clipped by an enemy that can curse. But it's only a resist because full on immunity would totally overstep Team Master. Despite these talents though, Rampage is still a very niche unit, and whether or not you use him depends on if you like ranged meat shields or not, which, let's be honest, not many people actually like them because usually normal meat shields are enough and ranged meat shields barely even exist. Ritual. Similar to basically all the other cats on the list, once you get Ritual Cat, he's useless outside of 4-star, even against red enemies because of his low stats. With these talents though, and strengthened in mind, you'll probably consider using him in the future. Talents: attack and defense buff 80%, 250 NP total. Strength buff 100% to 175%, 125 NP. Miniwave level 4, 5% to 50% chance max, 125 NP. Target zombie plus zombie killer 125 NP. Total 625 NP. It took me a while to think of what talent Salaryman should have because his potential is kind of insane. With an 80% buff to attack and defense, at level 50, he gains 58k HP or 29k HP per his 2 knockbacks, and 4.2k DPS or 7.3k DPS with his strength and buff talent. These stats are just alright, and because of it, I was initially thinking of giving him a cost down talent instead of his target versus zombies. But the fact is that he becomes very powerful thanks to these stats against his targets. Against reds, he'd have double the HP at 116k, and of course, accounting for his 2 knockbacks, he'd have 58k HP. Meaning that he actually has very solid survivability. I think that this is fair because of his natural cost, so I decided not to give him cost down. With 210 range, he should be effective against reds, but he'd face major competition with Courier, who deals an absurd 21k DPS against reds at the same level, with a higher standing range, piercing LD ability up to 400 range, better speed, and a better cost, while Salaryman with his strengthened talent deals 11k DPS. 11k DPS is great, but it's not courier great, and he also faces a little competition from Manic Island since they have extremely similar stats, as Manic would have 119k HP and 13k DPS at level 50, but he has single target and 3 knockbacks. This is why I gave Ritual the ability to target zombies, since zombies have generally low ranges and his direct competition like Cadaver Bearcat or Cat Chief have way less health than him, but slightly higher damage values, the builds cost a little less, and they don't need to wait until they have a strengthened ability to be at maximum effectiveness. Brainwash Island also exists as competition for him in this niche, but that assumes that you have him, and though he's very rare, if you happen to have him, then maybe Talented Ritual Cat wouldn't sound so appealing despite, again, Ritual having area attack and only 2 knockbacks. Mini Wave, similar to Cat Chief, is just something that help him deal a little more DPS while piercing, and even though it's at a 50% chance, he'd only be dealing 20% of his original damage due to how Mini Waves work, so it's not crazy damage or anything, and more so just useful for chipping the backline. Overall, these stat buffs would definitely make him solid and relevant despite the competition he'd face in both the red and zombie niches thanks to his high HP, 2 knockbacks, and high DPS. Even outside of his targeted type, he could easily be used as an area attacking version of Island Cat if you want to do that. Xmas Pudding. Xmas is a terrible cat as he's a variant of Island with area attack but horrendous stats. At level 50, he only has 40k HP and 3 knockbacks, so he can barely survive with this horrible 150 range, and even in 4-star with area attack he's still terrible. Giving him talents is rough because it's easy to accidentally make him OP because of his double bounty ability and area attack, or derivative since basically everything talent wise has been done with Little Island. But here's what I thought of. Talents: attack and defense buff, 40%, 250 NP. Dodge, 4 seconds, 4%, 40% max chance, 125 NP. Strengthen at 2/3 HP, 5%, 50% chance max, 125 NP. Savage Strike, 2%, 20% chance max, 125 NP. Total, 625 NP. I thought pretty hard about these talents so that he's both not too broken and also so that he's not derivative of any other Island variants, and this is what I came up with. A gimmicky, possibly very high damage dealing close range unit that could get you double the money for kills. So, attack and defense up are at 40%, which might sound weird, but hear me out. 40% gives him 56.7k HP or 18.9k HP per S3 knockbacks, which is less than Eraser Cat's HP at max. And the total HP is notably less than regular Islands at 62k, but it's balanced out by the abilities he both already has, those being area attack and double bounty, and the abilities he gains via talents. He's basically one of those units where you have to get the attack and defense talents first so they're actually usable, like Valkyrie or Dancer in this way. Dodge against everyone except metals at a 40% chance for 4 seconds is solid if it works out, but the chance is really awkward and only kind of dependable, even if the amount of time he dodges for is good. I made it this way because with 56.7k HP, he'd probably have enough time to actually get his dodge off and deal damage for 4 seconds with his high 9k DPS thanks to the attack up talent. But he's not as naturally good HP wise as other Island variants and he's not strong against anyone. He gets more interesting with his 2 other abilities though, since once he's knocked back for the first time, he gains a plus 50% strengthen, which would give him a DPS of 13.5k or per hit damage of 18.5k. If he can dodge in this state, then he'll be doing great damage, especially given his stack ability due to his low cooldown of 4.8 seconds. His Savage Blow at only a 20% chance seems low, but it's fair because with it he'd do 55.6k damage while strengthened, which is just 5k less than Can at level 50. There's no world where he wouldn't be putting in some serious hurt, assuming he gets the strike off, and that's why it's a 20% chance, since if it was higher, then he'd be doing level 50 can levels of damage left and right with area attack and double bounty. All of this hinges off of his dodge ability, as without it, he wouldn't be able to sit down in the face of large hordes and deal great damage to everyone. I think this will be a really unique role, and of course, as a gimmicky unit that entirely depends on good luck, whether or not he does well on a stage first depends on your luck and not necessarily what's actually in the stage. So possibly spending 625 NP on a gimmicky Island variant that has worse stats than all of them even when maxed may be a waste because it's not as dependable as normal Island variants, or it may be seen as something amazing you'd want to invest in now. Fully depends on the person in this case. Prisoner. Prisoner is already a solid unit, especially against reds, as in no gacha settings, he's regularly used to fight enemies like Professor A because of his 475 standing range, slow speed, and LD of 450 to 650 range. He's still not really a kind of go-to unit for regular red stages though, but hopefully these simple talents I have in mind will change that. Talents: attack and defense buff, 40%, 250 NP. Cost down, 1035C to 600C, 125 NP. Recovery speed up, 27 seconds to 12 seconds, 125 NP. Survive, 10%, 100% chance max, 50 NP initial cost, 175 NP total. Total 675 NP. These talents are very very boring. But I'm not here to intentionally give these cats absurd talents or anything, and honestly, if he had these abilities, they'd be incredible. A 40% buff to HP and attack gives him 20.7k HP and 2.8k DPS, and against reds, he'd have 41.5k HP and 4.2k DPS. For a sniper with single attack, this is actually really good. With these talents, his closest competition is Golfer, but Golfer at level 50 only has 200 more DPS than him, area attack, and a better niche, while he now costs twice as much as Prisoner and only has a standing range of 275. Golfer's still a very solid cat with a different niche, so his usage isn't overstepped when he's usable, but despite Prisoner's single attack, he should be able to more easily fulfill a similar role against even aliens, especially in 4-star, thanks to these buffs and thanks to his 475 range. His cost down talent from 1035C to 600C makes him very easily affordable and super unique, as there are no other cats to my knowledge that have 475 range and an LD ability. Recovery speed up makes him way more stackable, since you just have to wait 12 seconds to then spend only 600C again, and his 100% survive chance effectively gives him another knockback while making sure that he'd live and still be able to deal damage if something happens to clip him. Overall, I believe these talents make him not only great against red enemies if you need range, but also great in a generalist sense because he's a 600C backliner with an LD range of 450 to 650. And the only reasons as to why he's not overpowered are because he still has single target, only 2 knockbacks, and 0 immunities. I say that these are simple but highly effective talents. Gentleman Bros. Gentleman Cat, Gentleman Bros, or Exhibitionist Cat as I like to call him, quite frankly, is a horrendous unit. In his first 2 forms, he costs a staggering 1125C, and even in his true form, when he gets no stat changes aside from now costing 375C, his stats are just so horrible that he still remains as impossible to use even when he gets an 80% buff to attack and defense. This means that in order to make him usable, I have to get creative like I did with Xmas Pudding Cat to make them more unique, so here's what I got. Talents: defense buff 80%, 125 NP. Move speed up 8 ms to 25 ms, 125 NP. Freeze chance up 40% to 70%, 75 NP. Attack frequency up -10 frames on idle, -15 frames on backswing, 75 NP. Target zombie 100 NP. Total 500 NP. Yeah, these talents sound really weird, but hear me out. First, before I even cover the simple 80% defense up talent, I know he has Barrier Breaker, but I didn't give him the ability to target aliens because he only has 150 range, and his HP even at level 50 with an 80% buff is only 33k. This definitely isn't good enough to fight the majority of aliens. Couple this with his horrible movement speed and terrible 30 frame or full second backswing, and only a 30% chance to break barriers, and you've got yourself a unit that shouldn't even have this ability, especially when so many better alternatives like Kitty or Liberty or even Lil Macho Legs exist. I want to quickly go off script and talk about it with also my talents in mind as to why I did not make him target aliens. So again, the range issue is an extreme issue and he only has 33k HP. Aliens are known for having high range, so that's already a massive conflict, and only having 33k HP and no resistance or strong against is absurd, but he also targets reds, so what this means is that if I give him a strong against ability against aliens, it also affects reds, or if I give him resistance, it would also affect reds. Effectively, what this means is that with strong against, he'd have 66k HP. That's really absurd for a unit that only costs 375 and has an extremely low cooldown, and if I gave him a resistance talent, that'd be 132k HP. That's completely, again, insane for a unit that costs 375 NP. So no, I can't make this guy effective against aliens without giving him some kind of new talents like range up or something weird like that. So instead, that's why I went into a different direction and just ignored the fact that he had Barrier Breaker, because with these other talents I already gave him, like the attack frequency up, like the freeze chance up, like the movement speed up, this would make him completely broken against aliens, because again, to make him even effective against aliens, I would have to give him an ability that actually allows him to survive 1 or 2 hits, because there's no possible way that he's ever going to get his freeze off against any aliens at all, as is. As I said earlier, with a defense buff of 80%, he only has 33k HP or a measly 11.3k HP per his 3 knockbacks, and he still has single target. So I decided to go all in with his freezing ability. I factored in his low cost of 375C and his low cooldown of 4.5 seconds. Movement speed from 8 to 25 allows for him to get into possible blind spots easier, and it lets him hit enemies with a slower attack rate way more easily. More importantly, I nearly doubled his freeze chance from 40% for 2 seconds to 70%, so that he can actually be effective at his job if he gets hits in. And I lowered his attack cycle by 0.83 seconds or 25 frames so he can get in more hits. This means that he has a great attack cycle of 1.14 seconds instead of his previously absurd 1.93 second attack cycle. And he'll simply have more chances of getting his freeze chance, since basically every second he's going to have a 70% chance to do one for 2 seconds. Finally, I gave him zombie targeting because zombies don't really have any good freezers, and because generally they have low ranges, meaning that with Exhibitionist Cat's high speed, freeze chance, and low attack cycle, he'd most likely be able to fight them off well. Mix all of this with his very low cost of 375C and 4-second cooldown, and it seems like you have a monster. But here's the catch. Single target against both of these types mixed with a range of only 150 and a low 33k HP with a high amount of knockbacks make him still kind of hard to use. 150 range in single target means that if there are enemies of his typing, then he'll only be hitting the closest ones, and usually your threats aren't directly on the front line, be they reds or zombies. On top of this, if a zombie or red enemy happens to clip Exhibitionist, then it's more likely than not that he'll be knocked back or die, and both outcomes would give whoever he's freezing an easy way out. These problems are basically tenfold for if the stage is mixed with more than just reds or zombies, since he again has both terrible HP and range. Even though these talents basically make it mega easy to perma-freeze whoever you're trying to fight, assuming Exhibitionist can actually get his hits in against said threat, the circumstance in which that happens must also be just right. Though if you can't get into those circumstances, then he'll certainly be your best freezer against both types, no doubt, assuming he can actually get hits in. With this cat especially, I'd like your opinions on it. Is he too OP, or would he still be completely worthless with these talents? We're about halfway into the video, and I just want to say that if you enjoy my content, consider becoming a member. I'll always reply to your comments, and it'll just help me out a little bit overall. On top of this, if you want to talk to me, my community, give suggestions or whatever, then join the Discord, which is linked in the description. As usual though, before we get back into the video, here's another verse from the Bible. Proverbs 18:15. An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, in the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Nyalladin. If it wasn't for this unit's absurd amount of cat combos, it would have easily been one of the worst units in the entire game. Far worse than even Gentleman Cat. There's practically no way to actually make this cat genuinely viable, even with any talents. But here would be my attempt at making this unit almost usable. Talents. Defense buff, 100%, 125 NP total. Curse immunity, 50 NP. Insanely tough, black, red, floating, and aliens, 100 MP. Weaken, 10% to 100% chance max, 70% weaken for 4 seconds, 125 NP. Wave chance, level up, 1 to 3, 75 NP. Total 475 NP. So first off, the defense buff talent. 100% sounds absurd, but that's when you don't know that Nyalladin's natural level 50 HP is 8.1k and he has 4 knockbacks. 100% isn't insane for a unit this bad, and 80% isn't even enough. With insanely tough against black, red, floating, and aliens, and his later weaken against them, the intent there is to of course make him a weakened CC unit similar to Cat Quest heroes. With it, he'd have 97.2k HP against them, though due to his 4 knockbacks, he'd only have 24.3k HP before getting knocked back. This sounds alright, but when he weakens his targeted enemies, he'd have 165k HP against them and 41k HP per his 4 knockbacks. This makes him a semi-tank since he can't really just sit and soak up 165k damage due to his 4 knockbacks, and it's why I decided to change what was originally a cost down talent from his original 975C to only 550C or 390C to curse immunity, since he relies a lot on his weaken and his abilities in order to survive. Curse immunity is cheap because if he gets hit by basically any enemy that can curse, he'd be one tapped, so it'd only be useful in situations where there's an enemy curse cannon or if he can somehow survive a relic enemy attack, which is very unlikely. To some, these abilities might seem a bit OP, but I disagree. I balance him around his horrendous 51 frame force swing and his 2.67 second attack animation cycle. Because he has 15 idle frames and 51 force swing frames, you'd have to wait a horrendous 66 frames before he even gets a single attack off, or 2.2 seconds. With 190 range, enemies could still easily knock him back because without weaken, they'd only have to worry about 24.3k HP, which is about the same as normal max eraser's HP. Though if you can get this ability off, you'd not only have a lot of HP, but also your enemies will be weakened by an abnormally high 70%, and it'd probably be easy to perma weaken them from there. Not to mention the fact that he'd have a level 3 wave, so his weaken would pierce into and hit all of his targeted types. Overall, he has powerful abilities, but he'd still get totally shredded outside of his measly and also ancient 4 types. And even within them, his attack animation is so long and he's so expensive that it's fully possible for you to accidentally spawn too many of him and waste all your money. I think this is pretty balanced because he can do something very powerful with plenty of risk, but as usual, definitely give me your opinions on these talents in the comments. Wrestling Cat. As a variant of Jamera, she shares a lot of his weaknesses despite being stronger against Reds in him due to her strong Versus ability at level 50. Outside of 4-star though, and due to her pretty pathetic DPS, she faces and loses to competition like Ro and Jamera himself because they basically cost the same and Jamera has higher DPS stats once maxed. Though, with these abilities, I think that she could finally stand a chance again. Talents. Attack and defense buff, 35%, 250 NP total. Cost down, 1935C to 990C, 125 NP. Slow immunity, 50 NP. Surge, level 2, 100 through 200 range. 3%, 30% max chance, 125 NP. Total, 550 NP. These talents feel completely normal until that surge chance, and also the 35% buffs to attack and defense. I gave her those because I don't think 20% is enough given the fact that her main competition in Reds is Ro, and because of her strong against ability, it wouldn't make sense for her HP to naturally equal that of Jamera since that'd be pretty OP. Still, with 72k HP naturally against Reds, she'd have 144k HP. With only a single knockback, that's really good. And her DPS becomes 6.5k, which is more so alright than anything too crazy. Slow immunity is specifically for Professor A, and outside of that, I don't think it has much application, which is why it's only 50 NP. Cost down from 1935C to 990C feels fair because even with 144k HP, she's still a light tank, and outside of her niche, she only has 72k HP, which is again less than Jamera when he's maxed. It's also just the fact that the Jamera family's main weakness is the fact that they cost too much, and not necessarily their stats, since in a lot of situations, they can be very serviceable. Her weirdest talent, that being her level 2 surge from 100 to 200 range at a 30% chance, is mostly there to help with DPS occasionally. Kinda like dancers, though unlike my previous video with Manic King Dragons, she's not the kind of unit you'd stack, so it'd be pretty rare. With a level 2 surge, her damage would just hit twice in an area between 100 and 200 range, so 20k damage or 30k versus Reds, which isn't really that much. With these talents in particular, I could see most just going for the stat buff and cost down talents and nothing else, but I think that nonetheless they're pretty solid, if not mostly obvious. Kiss and Koi. This cat's in an even worse initial state than Nyalladin since they already had the strong against ability, meaning that I can't give them something like resistance or massive damage against their trait. Koi's stats are already basically impossible to work with, even when buffed, so I think that it's basically impossible to make this cat actually usable, especially given their oddly high 25 speed. Nonetheless, this is what I have in mind. Talents, attack buff, 80%, 125 NP. Survive, 20%, 100% chance max for 75 NP. Strengthen, 400% at 1% HP, 100 NP. Knockback, 3%, 30% chance max, 425 NP. Target floating, 75 NP. Total, 500 NP. This cat sucks, but I think that trying to use his oddly high speed and range is the right call in order to make him usable despite his horrendous natural stats. In fact, they're so bad that even with an 80% increase to damage at level 50, you'd only have 1.1k DPS. This is why I went in a different direction, as in, I took a page from Neo Cutter Cat's book and made him kind of a read-bound mid-ranger that gets high damage after his survive goes off. With the strengthen at 400% after he survives, he'd have 4.5k DPS and 350 range, meaning that if he gets in and takes a lethal hit, he'd be dealing 3k more DPS than King Dragon at max. Given its potential stackability due to his very low cooldown of 2 seconds and lower cost, this should make him an alright mid-ranger once he takes enough damage to trigger his survival chance. On top of this, against red enemies, he'd be dealing 6.8k DPS, which is extremely good given again his cost, recharge time, and stackability. But 350 range is still mid-ranging range, and if your stack of Kois is hit, then the whole thing would be gone. He basically functions like Citizen Mola with lower range and higher damage against his targeted type. As for his knockback chance, it depends on what you're going for, but I think that it could help a lot with controlling the crowd in case they're pushing too hard. And with this in mind, I made him target floating enemies too because they usually come in groups and have low ranges. And if you can get these talents against cyclones, then it'd probably help a lot. Generally, I believe that these talents make him way more interesting, as a glass cannon mid-ranger that can change usage if you get his KB talent is pretty unique, and whether or not you think it'd be a good or bad change depends on who you are and what you're trying to do, and while obviously he faces competition in the red niche from Courier, they're both totally different units that do different things, so unlike Salaryman, he shouldn't be overstepped on at all. Madame the Savannah. This cat already has alright stats for their price, cooldown, and knockback count at level 50, so I'm just going to try not to make him too OP or anything. Talents. Defense 20%, 125 NP. Cost down 600C to 350C, 75 NP. Recovery speed up 7.2 seconds to 3 seconds, 75 NP. Immune to slow, 50 NP. Movement speed up 8 ms to 15 ms, 125 NP, total 450 NP. Some of these units really show how poorly balanced this set of cats is, as we have units that are useless no matter what, like Nyalladin and Kiss and Koi, while we also have somewhat competent ones like this one here. Nonetheless, you may have expected his defense talent percentage to be higher because of the previous few cats, but no. With a 20% increase to defense, his HP at level 50 becomes 55k, which is slightly over double max erasers. Given his cost down talent from 600C to 350C, this is technically pretty worthwhile as you're getting 2 erasers out of it, which obviously would help a bit with stalling. It's also a pretty fair price as cats like Rice Ball function well despite costing 300C and having max eraser levels of HP. So a cat priced like this with more HP than max Rice Ball and max eraser should be great. Recovery speed being lowered from 7.2 seconds to 3 seconds instead of 2 seconds so that he doesn't exactly have an average meat shield recharge speed and need a cat combo in order to get him there, like Lil Mohawk for example. While a second difference isn't much, it matters when it comes to meat shielding because a 2-second cooldown offers you the ability to perfectly spam either your 3 or 2 meat shields, and 3-second cooldown just kind of feels awkward to use. Plus, it's also because of the extra bulk that 55k HP offers. Slow immunity is there in case you have to deal with slow, and for it to matter, I gave him a move speed up talent from 8 to 15. It's not the craziest thing in the world, but it's almost always nicer to get a meat shield to the front line quicker than slower so that they can soak up damage immediately. Some may think that because of Madame Savannah's warp immunity, it makes sense to make her more oriented to fighting aliens as a meat shield, though I disagree with this because Kite already exists. And because of Kite, you'd have to either make this unit pointless or overpowered in comparison to Kite. Making Madame Savannah just a generalist meat shield with a 3-second cooldown and 350C cost is the better option in my opinion. And generally, if these talents existed, I definitely buy them because it sounds like a nice meat shield for some more niche scenarios, or places where it feels like my meat shields aren't cutting it, especially since her health is just flat out really good. To put in perspective on how good her HP is, you need a level 50 plus 50 Ramen with a max HP talent to equal it, which might make this sound really OP, but unlike Ramen, Madame has no specific niches or resistances. Call Center. Like a lot of these cats, Call Center is naturally useless. With terrible stats outside of the super early game and horrible cat combos, most people would just get her and then forget about her immediately afterwards. The more I look at this group of cats, the more I understand why Ponos hasn't given them any talents, because a lot of them have abilities that suck, mixed with terrible stats in horrible ranges. This makes it feel impossible to give them talents that actually impact anything, or ones that aren't too OP, but nonetheless, here's what I have in mind. Talents. Attack and defense up, 50%, 250 NP total. Knockback up, 40% to 80%, 75 NP. Slow chance, initial 50 NP, 3 seconds, 8%, 80% chance max, 125 NP. Cost down, 1440C to 750C, 75 NP. Total 525 NP. When I said that it's hard to make her talents really good, I really meant it. When scaled, her DPS becomes really good, but her HP is always just alright. And even now with 6.6k DPS naturally, which is definitely more than average, she now does 10k DPS versus Reds with 56k HP against them. I decided to just go full into what she was already created to do, which is to knock Reds back. So I gave her a cheap knockback up talent that makes it highly likely to happen if you can just stack her. On top of this, I gave her the same 80% chance to slow Reds for 125 NP, since this would be enough to keep any Reds at bay just in case. Cost down is intended to make her more worthwhile to send out, since 750C for a unit with 6.6k DPS or 10k DPS versus Reds is solid despite her kinda bad HP. The reason why I don't think 10k DPS for this unit is broken is because of her 250 range, which is the same as Cameraman's and Courier's, her single target, and because she has a freaking 80 frame force swing. That's 2.6 seconds before she even attacks. It's more than likely that her DPS won't actually be 10k because she's also knocking back your enemies extremely effectively if you decide to invest in the KB up talent, but that's why I'd say it's actually fair. Call Center probably has some of the worst talents out of anyone in this theoretical talents video, but they're good if you want to KB and slow Reds extremely consistently, or if you just want a high DPS anti-red unit with 250 range even though Courier already exists. Kite. Kite's basically the poster child for having horrendous stats and being unusable, but also having solid cat combos. Them having Z-Killer gives me some ideas for what I could do, so here's what I thought would be a good idea talent-wise for this horrendous unit. Talents. Attack, 80%, 125 NP total. Massive damage v zombies, 75 NP. Survive chance, 50%, 50 NP. Strengthen at 1% HP. 5%, 50% strengthen at max. Total, 125 NP. Target Angels, 75 NP. Total cost, 450 NP. This cat's really hard to make not just a 4-star housewife since they both have the same attack range and similar LD effective range. Not to mention the fact that they're both meant to fight zombies with area attack. But here's what I thought of. The attack and massive damage talents are necessary for making him even usable against zombies, since with both of them he finally gets 4.9k DPS. That number is pretty good for a unit with range like this, since in comparison to Housewife, she only reaches similar levels once she's at 50 plus 40 with a max attack up talent. Though Housewife gets a Savage Strike, I decided to go in a different direction with Kite, since although his DPS is pretty solid, he's still really squishy. I didn't want to make him resistant to zombies on top of having massive damage, since I think that'd be a little OP and frankly unoriginal, so instead I gave him a 50% chance to survive for 50 NP and a 50% strengthen for 125 NP. It's pretty weird since if he doesn't survive, he'll certainly be one shot due to just having 10k HP. But if he does survive, his DPS shoots up to 7.3k. I think this isn't OP because he's a 350 range LD unit with only 10k HP, since I didn't give him a defensive talent, meaning that at most, he'll probably only take 2 hits to kill. Plus, all it takes is a single zombie to burrow into your stack of kites and they'd be completely defenseless. Similar to Kiss and Koi, I made him basically like Citizen Mola again once he's hit, except he's supposed to be used against zombies and his DPS is solid even before he gets his 50% strength in. His target against angels might seem weird too, but it ends up making sense once you realize that angels generally don't have the highest ranges despite their strong pushing power. The only ones that can straight up outrange him standing range wise are Sleipnir, Chick-fil-A, Calamaria, and Sunfish Jones, and a few other misc enemies. Even for enemies like that, if he has a stepping stone, then he should be able to do fine against the trait. And on top of this, there aren't that many angel units that you have access to that are like this. Like a few other cats on the list, you'd have to spend NP on all of his talents for him to be worthwhile. And whether or not this luck-based glass cannon style unit sounds good depends on who you already have, since he's not necessarily a stellar unit because of his lack of immunities and his 50% chance to survive. Especially since relative to everyone else on the list, he's pretty cheap, as he only costs 450 NP to max out, which isn't too bad. Ironclaw X. Here's the one everyone probably wanted to hear about, Ironclaw X. As a single target version of Dancer, he naturally has a lot of potential if he got talents, so here's what I had in mind. Talents: attack and defense, 80%, 250 NP. Savage Strike, last hit only, 3% to 30% chance max, 250 NP. Strengthen at 50% HP, 5%, 50% max, 125 NP. Surge immunity, 75 NP. Total cost, 700 NP. Finding the original formula I used to calculate these stats took forever. I don't remember where I got it since it's like 2 years old, but here's a new multi-hit damage for Ironclaw X with its 80% buff at level 50. And I'll be putting the formula on screen in case you're curious. Hit 1 deals 17.9k damage, 2 does 8.9k damage, and the third does 62.8k damage, or in total 89.8k damage. Maybe you've noticed something about these numbers when accounting for the Savage Strike, and that'd be a good catch since with the Savage Strike on his last hit, he'd be dealing 188k damage. And with the Strengthen, he'd do 282k damage total. And with all his hits, he'd be dealing 322k damage. That damage is completely insane. And I could see why you'd have the knee-jerk reaction to write in the comments that this is OP, but I think it's actually fine. For one, the Savage Strike talent is extremely expensive at 250 NP total to unlock, and it's only a 30% chance. This chance isn't bad as something like 10% or 20% to be sure, but it's simply undependable and it's impossible to expect and plan for. On top of this, this is only on the last hit at a 30% chance, and Ironclaw X's main issue is the fact that he misses this very final attack most of the time. Without it, he'd do 26.8k damage, or with Strengthen, 40.2k damage, which isn't that bad, but it's nowhere near broken for a unit with a 6-second attack cycle. His Savage Strike more so functions as an amazing rare ability that's extremely broken when it happens to the right enemy, but overall it probably won't hit the right enemy, and instead 282k damage will all be thrown into a peon. His Strengthen functions to give him even more damage in DPS, obviously, as I intend to go full into the idea of a single target high damage dealing unit. In this way, he can finally function as a version of Dancer that has single target and multi-hit, sure, but he also has a chance to deal damage in a burst to a single enemy that's on the same level as Awakened Bahamut with Explosion or Lavos without a Savage Blow. Even if he doesn't hit his Savage Strike, with Strengthen, he'd be dealing 22.4k DPS, and without it, he'd still have 14.9k DPS. So he'd still be dealing some great damage nonetheless. And his Surge immunity can help him out in niche scenarios, assuming he's fighting special enemies with Surges or some Akus and you break their shields. Cappy Jr., for example, is going to be hurting if this guy's talents actually existed. I didn't give him wave immunity because Dancer already has it. Overall, these talents sound extremely OP on paper, but in practice they'd probably be pretty balanced and mostly just serve to make Ironclaw X viable stat-wise. Just like Dancer. And while he doesn't necessarily fill any new niches or make a new role like Dancer did, since he's kind of like a mix between Barlog and Dancer, these proposed talents still make him very much worthwhile, especially in 4-star settings, where cats like Can or Barlog aren't available. Conclusion. Hopefully this time you rock with the talents I gave everyone. A lot of people said the talents I gave the Craze cats were very OP, but honestly it's hard to give cats like Manic Wall, Manic Island, or even Manic King Dragon talents that are good and not just useless or flat out broken. Definitely give your opinions on the talents I gave everyone this time around in the comments, and of course, before I go, here's a verse from the Bible. 1 John 1:10. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. This one's pretty simple. Everyone sinned, so saying that you never did just isn't true. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and like it, and of course, make a comment. On top of that, subscribe to my second channel where I talk about art and review comics. And if you want to support me further, then become a member of the channel. Make sure to have a blessed day everyone, and goodbye.